Welcome back to Queen City Corals. I'm Graham, and today we're going to be scaping our innovative marine 15-gallon aquarium. Now, the first thing we're going to talk about when we're scaping is going to be the type of rock that we're going to use. So there are a couple different kinds and brands that you can select from, but overall there's two broad categories: live rock and dry rock. Now, dry rock will eventually become live rock once it's sat in an aquarium for a little while. However, traditional live rock can oftentimes be harvested directly from the ocean. There are several companies that will ship it to you, or you can get it from a local fish store or local hobbyist. But usually when you're getting live rock, it's typically going to be dry rock that has been sitting in an aquarium and developed the beneficial bacteria that makes it live. Now, this beneficial bacteria is what's going to be filtering your aquarium, and it's very important that you have enough rock to sustain that and have enough rock to actually process the nutrients you're putting in the tank. Now, the general rule of thumb for how much rock you want to use is about 1 pound per gallon. However, there's definitely some fluctuations, and you can kind of get around that in a few different ways. So it's very important that you are putting in enough rock to properly filter your aquarium, as I said, and you want to make sure that it's not going to be a very small amount of rock to the point where you can start running into nutrient issues like high nitrates and phosphates, but you also don't want to use too much rock where it could be hard to scrape the glass or get flow into your corals, or even just not have enough swimming space for your fish. So we're going to go through how we're going to be scaping this tank and explain the ways that we're going to be preventing those issues. So again, there are a few different brands of rock. For instance, this one right here is Life Rock, and it is typically sold as live rock. However, this piece we have is dry. Now, there's also this sort of traditional Reef Saver rock that you'll find at a lot of fish stores in dry rock. There's also the Carib Sea Life Rock, and this is the one that I would recommend if you're going to be going with dry rock, because it actually has bacterial spores painted onto it. So when it goes into the water, those spores are activated and it allows it to become kind of a pseudo live rock. Now, this can be very helpful, not only because it's painted and has those bacteria, but also the paint can help to prevent the algae from growing that a lot of times will grow on this white rock very easily. Now, there are also some brands like Marco Rock that sell shelf rocks that are very flat and can be easy to stack with. That's the kind of rock we used on our 80-gallon display. You guys can check out that scape and the video where we toured it up here. But for today's build, we're going to be kind of mixing the different rocks and seeing what works for our tank. Now, there are a couple of different ways you can scape your tank. The traditional way is just a rock stack, where you kind of stack up your rocks in a way that looks nice and also seems pretty stable and won't get knocked over by a fish swimming past or when you're gluing a frag onto it. Now, the way we're going to go with is actually by building a structure, and we're going to end up gluing it and connecting it all together into one solid piece. Typically, when you have one solitary structure, I recommend not putting very invasive corals on there because it limits what you can do eventually down the road once that starts to grow into your rock. So there are a few things that we're going to need today, and I've got them all out on this table. The first and most important is some PPE. And the gloves are most important because I don't want a bunch of glue on my hands. I already get enough glue on my hands working and fragging in the shop. Then we're gonna need a mask because we'll be using some accelerant that definitely does not smell good and probably will give you cancer. And finally, we're gonna need some goggles because we're gonna be breaking up these rocks and I don't wanna catch a chunk of rock in my eye. The next thing we're gonna need is some sand. You can also just use the broken up pieces of rock instead of the sand. That is basically how sand is made. And that's probably what we're gonna do today instead of the direct sand, but you can use whichever is easiest for you. The next thing is going to be a hammer and chisel. This is gonna be for breaking up the rock and making it look the way that we're gonna want it. Obviously, the most important thing we need today is our rock. Again, we're going with dry rock today, because that's typically the way that most people start their tanks, and it's definitely the most cost effective, considering live rock can range anywhere from $7 to $25 a pound. Now, the next thing we're gonna need is some glue and some accelerant. What this does is it basically instantly sets the glue and forms a bond that allows it to stay solid without us having to hold it together. Now you could also use epoxy for this, but the epoxy is going to take a lot longer to cure, and you may even require clamps to hold it together while that epoxy is curing, especially if you're trying to do something like an overhang. The final thing that we're going to need today is a tape measure and some painter's tape. Now, this is how we're going to map out our tank onto this table and know the dimensions that we're working with. So that way, as I said, we don't get too close to the glass to the point where we can't really clean it or provide enough flow for our corals. So now that we've got all of our pieces together, we're going to actually go through and start putting it all together and building our rockscape. So now that I've got my PPE on, we're going to start breaking up some of these rocks. So all I'm going to do is break them into a little bit smaller chunks. And this is going to allow us to really shape it into the structure that we're going to want. So I'm just going to break up a couple of these rocks. It's pretty easy. You can even just use the hammer if you don't have a chisel to break it into some pieces. And like I said earlier, you can use this dust instead of the sand if you don't want to use a bag of sand for this. So these pieces look pretty good. I'll probably break up a couple more, and then we'll head back over to the table and get things started. All right, guys, so we're gonna tape out our tank. So our tank is 15 inches wide. So we're gonna mark at 15. So we've got our 15 inches across, and then it is 11¼ inches deep. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm actually going to include this tape, and then we're just gonna go inside of it. And what that does is it gives us a little bit of a barrier so we don't run up against the glass of a few inches. So we're going to go down 11¼ All right. And then we're gonna do the same thing here. So as you can see, I've broken up the rock into some smaller chunks, mainly because this build is gonna be smaller, but also because I find it easier to work with smaller pieces because you can shape them a little bit better. So we're just gonna sort of start playing with it. Honestly, I don't know what we're gonna go with, and that's kind of the fun of scaping, is just seeing what works. So I'm just gonna start finding pieces that kind of lock in together pretty well, like this one. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get our glue, I'm gonna put on my mask and get our accelerator ready. So typically with this glue, you wanna use a more viscous glue than we typically use in the hobby. So that way it really kind of slides on. And we're gonna put that in the joint, and then we're gonna use our accelerator. That will get it to adhere. Go back through, some more glue, accelerator. Okay, and now you can see this piece is nice and well connected. I am definitely regretting doing this on our table because it is going to be a little messed up after this. So next little trick is going to be adding some glue into these joints and then sprinkling either sand or rock pieces in there. So this is going to give us a look that it's not just a bunch of rocks glued together, and it'll look more natural. As you can see, now it sort of just looks like rock instead of glue. So it gives you more of a cohesive piece. And so I'm just going to kind of be branching out from this center piece right here. And so we're just going to be working slowly with these tiny pieces of rock to build it together. And you are definitely going to go through quite a bit of glue here with this process, just because it is definitely going to take a lot for you to get the look you're going for, especially if you're using this method like me, where you're going through a bunch of different rocks to create kind of an interesting look. So I recommend having a couple bottles of glue on hand. Also several pairs of gloves, because you definitely will get some glue on there, and either it will get attached to the bottle, or if you're a little unlucky, the rocks themselves. So we're just gonna keep going here, branching out. I like to make it kind of open with some arches in there, just to kind of give it some interesting design. I definitely would recommend looking up some pictures online of some different reefscapes that you like, so that way you can try to have an idea in your head before you get into it. But for me personally, I like to just kind of go as I'm building and finding something I like. I also recommend making a good amount of flat points on here. That way you have plenty of spots to put corals. All right, so as you can see, it's starting to get a little heavy. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna now add a little bit of supports at the bottom. And as you can see, my glove is breaking, which is super fun, and why I recommend having a few gloves. All right, so as you can see, we're kind of getting towards the borders of our tank. So I'm going to kind of expand out through the bottom, so that way we can have a little bit more ledges down here. Now, with these rocks at the bottom, you can also definitely just get away with stacking them. And again, that can make it a little easier if you're looking to add some more invasive corals, or if you have some pests that you end up dealing with, or even if you just want to mix your scape up a little bit later down the line. But we're going to glue it just because it makes it easier for us. And then the other thing you want to note is the height. So we're going to go about halfway up this tank. This tank is 15 inches tall. So we're going to be at about the 8 to 10 inch mark. A couple of the rocks can extend a little higher, either for SPS or just kind of an aesthetic look. But we definitely don't want to get too high up here. I think I'm gonna add a little arch. So I'm gonna be connecting these pieces in an arch. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna connect them up here first. Definitely do not do this over a table or object you care about. I am currently ruining our table and am definitely gonna get yelled at tomorrow. All right, so I am feeling like we are getting pretty close here. So as you can see, this is nice and sturdy now. Even though I just glued it, that's because of the accelerator. And so next we're gonna go through and find all the visible glue spots and fill that in with our rock dust. So we're gonna start up here. And again, you wanna do the same thing, just a little bit of glue, your dust, and the accelerator will also blow off any of your rock that didn't actually attach. And this is definitely not necessary because your glue will eventually get covered in things like coralline algae and regular algae. But it definitely does make it easier for it to get coated, because it's harder for things to grow on the glue than it is for them to grow on the rocks. So while it doesn't look super obvious right now, after a couple weeks in the water, it definitely will be. And we're gonna kind of grab it and pull it onto its back. And this will basically just allow us to get into some of the tighter areas where we can't really reach. And we can also firm up some of our glue joints to make sure that they are nice and sturdy. You have some big patches like this, just put a couple of rocks on there directly to cover up the glue joint. All right guys, so now that we've got the rock in the tank, as you can see, there's quite a bit of vertical space left over. and that is to enable us to add some SPS corals towards the top. We also want most of our rock to be lower because we're gonna have a lot of LPS corals in here that aren't gonna like a ton of light. Now, as you can tell, the bottom is a little barren, and so what we're gonna do is just add some little island rocks on the bottom, and that avoids some of the problems of running into pests that you can't remove from your main structure, and also quick growing corals like zoas, pallies, clove polyps that are going to take over your main rock structure. So we'll have some separated rocks out here just to add a little bit more corals and also add a little bit more space to fill in. But it's also important to remember we're gonna have sand on the bottom, and also we want space to be able to clean the glass nice and easily. So it's gonna make maintenance a lot easier for us. All right guys, time for the big weight reveal. And it is 4 pounds, which is definitely not what I said earlier about a pound per gallon. And now the thing that we're gonna do to make up for that is we're gonna add, as I talked about in some of our other videos, cycled media. In this case, we already have it here, but you could just add some brand new marine pure spheres or any other type of biological media that you can buy. There are a bunch of different brands out there that offer one. However, I usually use marine pure just because that's what we already have in the shop, and it's already pre-cycled. If you guys did enjoy the video, make sure to like. If you guys have any questions about scaping, you can leave those in the comments down below. And if you guys want to stay up to date on our latest content, you can subscribe. And I will see you guys in the next one.